Howdy, y'all. You ever hear the one about the 3 statisticians that went possum hunting? After a half hour or so, they finally see one sticking its head up out from a hole in the ground, and the first statistician fires, misses a yard to the left. Next statistician fires, misses a yard to the right. Third statistician yells out, "We got him!" Given what I've read lately, I'm pretty sure those statisticians all work at the Federal Reserve. See, last week the new CPI numbers came out, and glory of glories, inflation continues to be very mild. Over the past 12 months, prices have risen only 3.2%. Indeed, the last several months have seen considerable deceleration. Yeehaw! And why has this happened? Well, if you ask the good folks at our central bank, it's the result of their interest rate policy. If you remember back into March of 2022, the one-year rate of inflation was 8.5%, the highest we'd seen since them depressing days of the 70s and early 80s. Now, this got the good folks at the Fed thinking. I'll bet if we made it harder for people to afford stuff, the price of stuff would fall. So they got to raising interest rates so as to dampen the demand for goods and services and thus constrain the rate of increase of prices. Now, indeed, right now, the federal funds rate is at its highest level since just before the financial crisis, and inflation has decelerated considerably. We got them! Except, let's have a closer look at the possum they're hunting. Because what's true on average doesn't always turn out to be what's true in reality. Now, in order to look at this a little bit more deeply, we need to look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, because they're the ones who calculate inflation. And guess what? It's not just one number. What we here call the rate of inflation is really an average of all sorts of other rates of inflation for different product categories. Furthermore, it's a weighted average. Here's a breakdown. Now, I'm not going to expect you to, there's not going to be a test or anything, but just have a quick glance at it. What that shows you is how much of the inflation is calculated from shelter, from food, from energy, and so forth. See, that's the weighted average part of it, all right? They don't average everything in evenly. Like, for example, look there. Shelter is 32.39%. So, we got all these different averages in there, right? And that means that if the price of shelter goes up, well, that's going to be quite a bit of the overall average. On the other hand, alcoholic beverages, look at this. Alcoholic beverages, 0.99%, all right? So 0.99%, it's not nearly as big a part of a person's budget. So if you're going around telling everybody you're broke because Pabst Blue Ribbon went up by 10 cents a can, that's either a bold-faced lie or a very sad statement about your lifestyle. Now let's look at 6 of the largest categories, and therefore the categories that play the biggest role in moving the overall average, all right? What I'm going to do here is, I got all kinds of stuff set up for you, all right? What I'm going to do here is, if you can see up the top here, that's shelter, all right? And that's 32.4% of the overall average. Food at home, that's 8.5%. Vehicles, transportation, that's new and used vehicles. That's 8% of the average person's budget. We got energy down here at 7.5. That's going to be gasoline and fuel oil, electricity, gas utilities. Transportation services, that's going to be, I wish you could see these up close. I got some real cute pictures for everyone, but I was experimenting with the range on the camera, and this turns out to be ideal, so you can't really see my little picture of a bus right there. But anyway, it's like buses and airplanes and so forth. And then food away from home, I got a little picture of a French restaurant there. That's 4.8%. Now, those are the 6 largest categories, and they're about 2/3 of total CPI. Now again, these numbers here, like 32.4%, 8.5%, that's the weight. That's not the rate of inflation. All right, let's do a little thought experiment. If raising interest rates really did lower demand, which then lowered inflation, which of these do you figure would have been most affected? All right, now remember, the number was 3.2% just on average. And in reality, some prices rose faster than 3.2% and some slower than 3.2%. Some of the shots missed to the right and some of the shots missed to the left. And if the Fed story is correct, the things most affected by changes in demand and interest rates should be the ones that accelerated slower than 3.2%, right? So let's go through this. Let's think about this. Let's go into order of how big they are to start with, all right? how big a share they've got. Again, these numbers up here are the share, not the rate of inflation. Housing. How do you figure that would be affected by an increase in interest rate? Well, you figure that'd be affected a lot, wouldn't it? You think that'd be real responsive to Fed policies. So, this one of my reveals right here, like in one of them shows where they redo a house. Up there, I got my category for less than 3.2%. Responsive. Now, it's going to be a bit of a problem with my head in the way, and perhaps I'll adjust to that in just a moment. So, I'm going to leave housing above that line. I'm going to put everything that should have been pretty responsive and therefore should have accelerated by less than 3.2%, because one more time, let me drive this home. Everything didn't increase by 3.2. Some stuff was faster and some stuff was slower. So if the Fed is telling the right story, that they're the ones that slowed it down, then things that their policy should have affected, they should be the ones up here at the top. Responsive, less than 3.2, responsive to their policies, right? And then down here I'm going to have unresponsive, all right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the half of things that are more responsive in the top and less responsive in the bottoms. All right, so once again, what I'm saying here is housing that ought to be kind of responsive. So I'm going to leave it above the line. I'm going to leave it up there, right? What's next? We got food at home. Food at home. Well, let's think about that. Food at home, you got to eat anyway, right? And lowering demand doesn't make you any less hungry. I mean, we might buy more Spam than steak. But probably nothing significant. So I would not figure that Fed policy would have had much of an impact on those prices. So we're going to put that one down here. We're going to put that one under less responsive. So let me take my little magnet off of here. I'm going to leave just off for a second because I need to make a space down here first before I can put it down there. Vehicles. Now there's one that I'll bet was a big contributor to the overall lower level of inflation. When times are tough, you don't go buy a new or even used car. You just get the old one repaired. Plus those financing car costs would be up, wouldn't they? So let's make sure vehicles are already, well, they're already up there. Let me move it up a little bit. That should be one that was pretty responsive if the Fed story is true. Energy. That's a tough one here. I mean, it's going to include, like I said, gasoline, fuel, and so forth. You still got to heat and cool your home, and my God, do we have to cool our home here in Texas. All right, no. In fact, I've got an AC unit right there that I'm taking a terrible risk right now. I turned it off right now for the sake of you all hearing me, even though I might end up sweating. But that's just the way it is. I mean, it's a public service I do here. So, you're going to have to do at least some driving. Here's energy. You're going to have to do at least some driving. I'm going to guess it's not as responsive. I mean, you know, probably you don't take as many summer trips, but generally speaking, that's not going to be as responsive. So I'm going to leave it down here below the line, all right, below the line. Okay, transportation services, likewise, probably didn't respond very much to this attempt to lower demand. I mean, you're not going to take as many plane trips and so forth, but, you know, hey, some stuff's going to be faster and some stuff's going to be slower, all right? Half of the things, roughly speaking, in terms of the weight, are going to be faster than 3.2 and half slower, so we got to figure out which ones would be which. Food away from home. Well, this is a luxury. Surely food away from home would be very reactive, very responsive to Fed policy. People are not going to bother going out to eat. Now I got time to put this down here. People are not going to be going out to eat if the prices, or I'm sorry, not prices going up, if the demand's going down, if the Fed has lowered your ability to buy things, all right? So, let's summarize this. If the Fed's policy was responsible for the deceleration in inflation, then we should expect inflation to have decelerated the most in industries that would be directly affected by falling private sector demand and rising interest rates, okay? So, we got here, what do I have above the line? Things that should be ending up going less than 3.2, really helping out, really helping out. The Fed, boy, aren't they a bunch of freaking geniuses? They threw up them interest rates and lowered demand, and sure enough, the prices of shelter and vehicles and food out all fell even faster than the average, all right? But these probably didn't react nearly as much, all right? Just on the basis of theory, that these probably didn't contribute as much. So this is what I'm guessing here. I'm guessing that these up here responded real well, and these down here didn't. Again, if the Fed story is true. All right, by the way, this is 44.7% of the total, and this down here is 22.2%, all right? So that's helpful as well, that the things that would be, we're theorizing, the things that would be most responsive, it's of course going to turn out not to be true. That's kind of the exciting part. I'm going to do this a little bit like an episode of Columbo. We already know the Fed's wrong, all right? So we're just going to figure out how is John going to prove it. Just one more question before I leave. So, we've got these things up here, 44.7%. These up here, they ought to be responding real well, all right, to this attempt by the Fed. Let's see what the numbers really were. Hey, it's another reveal. Now, I used red for anything that accelerated faster than 3.2. Boy, it's hot, all right, so it's red. Anything that accelerated less than 3.2, and it turned out to actually be negative numbers, but anything less than 3.2 is cool, it's green, all right? So those are the actual numbers right there. As a matter of fact, shelter accelerated faster than the average. Food out, screw the lower demand, I want them nachos, all right? So that also accelerated faster than average. And these down here, actually, the energy and the food at home fit the basic idea that, well, they're probably not going to fall as much. But, oh, I'm sorry, I've got it on the wrong places. My God almighty, John. Let's see here. Food at home. I've got the reason for all the tape there is I've got a metal ruler taped underneath there. So I thought this was magnetic to start with, but it ain't. Oh, here we go. All these visual aids, and I didn't line it up right. Shelter, vehicle. Okay, the top one's right. So that's right. But down here, food at home and transportation services, they actually, that fit the Fed theory that those things wouldn't have been as responsive and didn't help as much. Energy went down a lot. Anyway, we'll get into this. All right, now. And so let me also show you here that if we put all these, okay, so let's go ahead and make a weighted average out of these. Don't want to do that one next? No, let's do this one next. Which ones fit and which ones didn't? The Fed's theory doesn't hold up for shelter, for food out, or for energy. For shelter, for food out, or for energy. Actually, the prices did not go the way that they would have said they would have gone if their theory that they're raising the interest rate is what controlled inflation, all right? Wrong direction, wrong direction, wrong direction. And unfortunately, 32.4% right there, 4.8 and 7.5. Well, let's make a, okay, so hold on here now. Let's make a little weighted average out of these numbers right there. What was the average change of, sorry about that. What was the average change of price of things that should have been slower than 3.2? Positive 6.3. All right, so these should have all accelerated less than 3.2 if what caused the deceleration in inflation was a fall in demand. These should all let's put it this way, they didn't fall. Risen slower than 3.2. They didn't. They rose almost double 3.2. And down here, the ones that you would think would be less affected, they actually net fell. Net fell, all right? Now, you average those two together with a weighted average, and you're not, actually what you're going to end up with is, let's see, John, I wrote it down here. Not quite the 3.2 we got. What you would have to average in as well is medical services also fell. Right, medical services accelerated very slowly. The government became very involved in medical services over the course of COVID, and there have been a number of delays in contract negotiations and various government policies. What done slowed down the acceleration there. So anyway, let me drive this home. If what happened here is not consistent, here. If what has just shown you the summary of that, that's the 21.6% and so forth. All the things that were consistent with their story, 21.6%. The things that were not consistent, 44.7%. It looks pretty much here like the idea that what slowed prices down was raising interest rates and lowering demand. That doesn't make any sense. I mean, you would have seen a big reaction here, and we got a little bit of a reaction there, which we'll talk about in a moment, by the way. And this makes no sense whatsoever. The Fed story doesn't hold up, all right? So, sounds to me like we need to maybe go back to March 2022 when all this started and see what happened back then. I mean, maybe we kind of need to see what started it in order to figure out what should end it, all right? Now, let's see here. I got the inflation numbers printed out for 12 months ending 2022. And what I have circled there, sticking with our theory that the average rate of inflation of 8.5%, well, some stuff accelerated faster and some slower. And the stuff that accelerated faster is going to hold the secret to what really caused the inflation, all right? The stuff that accelerated faster. So I've circled the stuff that accelerated faster. Food, energy, just a little, huh? And new and used vehicles, all right? So what was happening there? What was happening in those areas? Well, it turns out I know. First of all, with the vehicles, COVID, you may remember, caused some big supply chain problems, particularly in terms of getting chips. My computer died in the middle of that, by the way. I had to spend a whole lot of money to get a new computer because I wanted a decent gaming computer. A lot of us ranchers have some online groups where we get online and, you know, make raids and various orc camps, that sort of thing. Anyway, so chip prices were way up. That made new cars very hard to find, and it drove up used car prices dramatically. So that's what was still going on back then. What about food and energy? Let's look at that again. Food prices, and look at those energy prices. My gosh, March 2022. I wonder what was going on then. You know, I was going to have a guest on this episode. I asked Vladimir Putin if he would be a guest today. You know, I wanted to ask him, hey, what was it that happened just a few weeks before all this, huh? Back in February. And I asked him to be on the show, and he said, "Niet." And I said, "Почему?" And he said, "Я не знаю, товарищ, я читаю журнал." Sorry, I took a year of Russian back during the Cold War, and I hate to think I'll never use it again. Anyway, he wouldn't be on my show. We know damn well why them prices went up. Russia invaded Ukraine. That's why the prices went up, all right? And as an aside here, by the way, bear in mind how important those prices are right there, those energy prices. Those feed into every other price on this page. When you got to pay more for energy, you've got to pay more for making food, for making vehicles, for making apparel. Everything else gets affected by that. Those energy prices are extremely important. So why did they eventually fall, though? Why did those prices come back down? Well, I asked a fella. I didn't ask him. I just looked it up online. A fella named Rick Newman, senior columnist at Yahoo, which is not the best name in the world for an agency you're trying to get information from. Finance. He said there's several reasons for the fall in energy prices. One, the war in Ukraine wasn't the shock they thought it was going to be, so we had the initial speculation, and then it turned out it didn't lower the supply as much as they thought. Supply has picked up. More refining capacity has come online, and demand from China, pardon me, a huge energy customer, has been weak amid a sputtering economy there. Oh my God, that's it. The Fed must have raised interest rates in China by mistake. Their policy works after all. Or it could be that the major factors that cause both the acceleration and deceleration in inflation are totally unrelated to interest rates and aggregate demand, and that the Fed has raised rates for no good reason. Man, I hope not, because even though they missed, they're patting themselves on the back right now. Just like them 3 possum hunters, but with the addendum that those 2 missing bullets, they actually hit somebody. Also worrisome is the fact that OPEC has been talking about production cuts so they can drive the prices back up. Not only will that reverse the trend we've seen in inflation, but it's going to cause our 3 hunters to anxiously reload and start shooting again. My advice to you, keep your head down.